Bienvenidos, welcome. My name is Allison Heaney. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Vice President of Learning and Public Programs here at the museum. And we are so excited for tonight's event. It's actually part of our Pride series we've been running all month, but this really is the highlight of that series. Absolutely fantastic. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I would like to give some recognition to the Port of Long Beach, which is our sponsor for this event. They've been very generous with us and sponsored our entire series. Including June 30th, I do want to give a shout out. We're hosting a symposium on empowerment in Pride spaces. If you're interested, this is going to be an interactive 2-hour session. We have 3 incredible drag queens from the BIPOC community coming to talk about drag as advocacy. We're also going to have a little roundtable discussion with the community, a gender-affirming closet, and the opportunity for people to come up on stage. So please do reserve that. That's Sunday, June 30th at 1 p.m. And without further ado, I have to read this because there's so much goodness here, I couldn't possibly memorize it all. So for our guest speaker tonight, Ignacio Darnaude, we're so excited because he is an art scholar and lecturer whose expertise lies in uncovering the creative codes used by queer artists to express their forbidden desires during repressive times. Mr. Darnaude relinquished his role as the head of international marketing for Walt Disney Studios and for Sony Pictures to focus on his project, Hiding in Plain Sight, Breaking the Gay Code in Art, which includes his documentary in the works, articles, lectures like this, and his Instagram at Breaking the Gay Code in Art, which you can follow on Instagram right now. Some of his recent lectures include Don't Say Gay, the Erasure of Queerness in Art for the Social Equity Conference, organized by the University of San Francisco, a conference in New York Historical Society entitled Coded, the Hidden Love of J.C. Leyendecker, and the lecture Picasso, Garcia, Lorca, and Salvador, Dali, revealing the queer themes in their work for UCLA and the Cervantes Institute. A regular contributor to the Harvard Gay and Lesbian Review magazine, Mr. Darnaude has recently honored with an arts grant from the city of West Hollywood for his 4-lecture series about the impact of queer artists throughout history. So if you would, please join me in welcoming Ignacio Darnaude.
Wow, that sounds impressive. Good evening. Thanks so much for being here tonight. Like Alison said, my name is Ignacio Darnaude, and I'm really, really grateful to MOLA for hosting today's lecture, which, as you can see, is called Exploring Queer Art History Through a Latin American Canvas. And in this lecture, closer to the mic? Okay. And in this lecture, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the extraordinary findings from my research for my project, Hiding in Plain Sight. And I'm really excited to see a very diverse audience today here, united by your love of Latin American and Chicanx artists, some of the artists I'm going to be talking about are here in the audience tonight. And the lecture will be around 1 hour, and there will be time for a Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to start, and so please make sure you turn your phones off. So before I start, I have 2 quick caveats. You're going to hear me use the term homoerotic art a lot. And by that I mean a piece of art, a visual, that is not overtly sexual, however is very appealing to the gay audience in a subtle or not so subtle way. And I'm also probably going to be using the terms gay and queer indistinctively. So as I'm sure you know, the term queer for the longest time was used as a slur against the LGBT community, but lately it has been reappropriated by a broad section of this community as an inclusive umbrella term for the whole community, and also as a proud defiance of heteronormativity. So I want to start with a little bit of context. So you may not know this, but many of the world's most valuable and most expensive paintings were created by queer artists, including, for instance, the recent sale of Andy Warhol's Marilyn Monroe for over $200 million. However, when asked, as I did in preparation for my documentary, the vast majority of the population cannot name any queer artists. So think about it. And the main reason is because the art world has erased the importance of queer art and artists throughout history. So while it's completely okay to talk about Picasso's female muses, if you try to bring up, for instance, the queerness of an artist in relation to their work, the response in many cases, up until very recently, from many museums and some museum boards, which, believe it or not, are very conservative, the response is usually, oh, that's irrelevant, kind of like a don't say gay policy. And the problem with that is that this silence reinforces the stigma and the lack of visibility of the LGBTQ community. So a fact that is not taught in schools is that in spite of this erasure, far from being invisible or just a new trend, queer art and queer artists have appeared in every culture and in all media, crossing through all genders, races, and beliefs, from Egyptian tombs to Greek vases, Latin American ceramics, Roman and Etruscan frescoes, all the way to today's queer artists. In fact, in my research, I uncovered that in spite of this erasure, queer artists have revolutionized main culture and art history around the world, from the Renaissance all the way to present times. So these images that you have here are some of the hundreds of iconic images created by queer artists. And I love this quote from the writer Camille Paglia, who says, "For 2,500 years, Western culture has fed itself on the achievements of small bands of queer artists attaining visionary heights through defiance of the established code of beauty." But because of legal and societal repression, queer artists have always faced a dilemma, which is, should they hide their sexuality or should they be open with their sexuality and their work, and in doing so, face the possibility of prosecution from severe laws that were not repealed in many countries until recent times. I mean, you may not know this, but male homosexuality was not decriminalized in the UK until 1967. And there are over 70 countries still criminalizing homosexuality today, and at least 8 of them with a death penalty. So this brings me to the core of my lecture. I'm going to show you the coded imagery and the creative strategies used by queer artists to express their same-sex desires during repressive times without fear of retribution. And I'm going to cover that in 3 sections. Artists using homoerotic, classical, mythological, and religious imagery. Artists featuring queer imagery hiding in plain sight. And artists creating coded queer imagery. So what I find extraordinary is that, as I'm going to show you, from the 1700s all the way until today, Latin American artists from Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Mexico, Costa Rica, Venezuela, they used the same creative strategies, the same codes, the same alibis than the Western, the European, the North American artists to express their homoeroticism, even though these Latin American artists lived in countries that were in most cases very close to international dialogues and influences. And I'm going to show you in every section today, I'm going to start by showing you an example of a code or an alibi used by a Western artist, such as here on the left, the Italian artist Garofalo, and then followed by an example of how Latin American artists use the same codes and strategies, such as in this case, the Mexican artist Ángel Zárraga. And you're going to notice that some artists are going to keep coming up, their name. Sometimes it's even funny on how often they appear. And that's because they literally used every trick in the game, every trick possible, every alibi possible to express their same-sex desires in a way that was not punishable. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be showing you as many examples of lesbian Latino artists as I would like to, Because as I'm sure you know, societal repression was amplified towards women, limiting their creative expression and their exposure. So I want to start with the first category. So throughout history, artists have used coded, classical, mythological, and religious images, such as this, as their alibi to express their same-sex desire in a way that was visible to those they wanted to attract without alienating the mainstream audience. So classical images, such as the one on the left by Donatello, they use the alibi that these images evoke ancient Greece. Ancient Greece, where same-sex desire was accepted and where a beautiful male nude symbolized a beautiful spirit and the greatest qualities of mankind. And images of mythological gods, such as the one in the middle, have been used also throughout history under the pretense that their nudity takes place in fantasy. And provocative religious images, such as the Saint Sebastian by Guido Reni on the right, they don't get questioned because of the sacred subject matter. Okay, so let's start now talking about Latin American artists. So just like Western artists use the classical alibi to portray same-sex desire, so do Latin American artists. Here we see three examples, the one on the left by Saturnino Herrán, the one in the middle by Roberto Montenegro, both Mexican artists. And as you can see, their work is very classically trained. And they use that for these homoerotic classical images. And the image on the right, which I particularly like, is called The Rest, and it was created by an 18-year-old Colombian artist called Dionisio Cortés Mesa. And this actually, believe it or not, is a revolutionary image in that this is one of the very first male nudes in the history of Colombian art. So one of the most important modern-day Latin American queer artists is the Chilean Claudio Bravo, whose work sells now for millions of dollars. And here you see three examples of Claudio Bravo's hyper-realist, homoerotic, classical images, which is one of his favorite themes. So let's talk about Greek gods. So Greek gods have always been very popular because they open a window into the timeless desires of women. So while Christians cover their body as something sinful, the Greek gods, they display their beauty, their nudity proudly. This is why from A to Z, from Apollo to Zeus, Western artists have used mythological gods as an alibi to portray same-sex desire, again, under the pretense that this nudity is taking place in fantasy. So needless to say, Latin American artists have also used this mythological alibi. Here you see three examples of the hugely homoerotic mythological images created by an artist you're going to hear about a lot today, the Venezuelan Pedro Centeno Vallenilla. And these images of Bacchus and Narcissus and the Sphinx, as you can see, they reflect a clear influence from Renaissance artists like Michelangelo. But Centeno Vallenilla has a personal style, which is purely aimed at glorifying the male body. Here you see three more images by the same artist, mythological images, and I want you to pay attention to the one on the left, Icarus, which I find as particularly daring, particularly in the year that it was created. And while some critics praised the work of Centeno Vallenilla, others called it kitsch. And they said that his work exudes a tropical, homoerotic exoticism. So three more examples. The one on the left, also by Centeno Vallenilla, of Olympian gods, and the one on the middle on the right by Claudio Bravo. In the middle, he depicts a Greek bacchanal of Greek gods, and on the right is entitled Dionysus. So it's a tribute to the Greek god Dionysus, but literally it's just an excuse to portray a male nude. So I'm going to talk about now about the Mexican artist, Saturnino Herrán. He was from indigenous Mexican and Swiss descent, which influenced his work tremendously. So Herrán is one of the many Latin American artists who combine mythological and indigenous images as an alibi to portray homoeroticism. And Herrán was a big proponent of a movement called indigenismo, a movement which wanted to embody the nation's soul by elevating the identity of the indigenous races. And he did so, Herrán did so, creating majestic paintings of Mexican indigenous people, imbuing them with heroic strength and beauty and dignity, using all the techniques he learned from his European academic training. And here you see 3 examples of his beautifully homoerotic images from a large mural he created called Our Ancient Gods, which features indigenous gods and members of the pre-Columbian elite. So Our Ancient Gods is Herrán's most famous and controversial mural. So it features a very interesting culture mix with worshippers of a godlike figures who has kind of elements from Aztec and Catholic gods. And in a way, the artist is asking us, the viewer, to unify these 2 cultures spiritually. And Herrán, to create these images, he hired muscular young men with ethnic features in local gyms in Mexico City to create these images. And while some critics praised his work, others called it effeminate. And Herrán worked on this mural until the day he died. And he died at only 31 years old. And he became a pioneer in muralism, paving the way for artists who started next to him in class, like Diego Rivera and Roberto Montenegro. So speaking of the Mexican artist Roberto Montenegro, the image that he created on the left of the indigenous god Cuauhtemoc is the perfect alibi to portray homoeroticism. And then on the right is his triptych called Science and Technology, which features an idealized blend of mythological gods, indigenous people, and models with bodybuilder bodies that really belong in a physique magazine. So now let's talk about religious images. Religious images are some of the most popular alibis to portray homoerotic desire. So nudity in Christian arts, I'm sure you know, is sinful and is only acceptable as a subject of tragedy or is in scenes based in the Bible. And Western artists portray saints or other religious characters such as Jesus in provocative poses which go unquestioned because of the sacred subject matter. And in many cases, if the image was too beautiful and it aroused the viewer, it was quickly brushed off as religious fervor. So stories from the Bible, such as the sacrifice of Isaac, the Good Samaritan, or the prodigal son, which on paper don't have a homoerotic read, are portrayed in Western paintings, such as this, with a clear homoerotic feeling. So Latin American artists, many of them coming from countries with very strong religious background, took great advantage of this religious alibi. On the left, the Mexican artist Ángel Zárraga used a modernist approach to portray the 3 wise men, who apparently they just came out of the gym. And in the middle, Roberto Montenegro uses the parable of the prodigal son to portray a clearly homoerotic scene. And on the right, there is a painting by the Argentinian Alfredo Gutero that depicts a very hunky dead Christ. So the Chilean Claudio Bravo uses the Annunciation in this painting as an alibi for what it is, a sensual and clearly homoerotic scene. So the Venezuelan artist, again, Pedro Centeno Vallenilla, created many homoerotic images using the alibi of the story of Adam and Eve. I'm particularly struck by the image in the middle, in which he portrays Adam like a pinup model. So, up until the Renaissance, angels were secondary characters in art, neither male nor female. They became a perfect vehicle for Renaissance artists, many of whom were queer, to portray androgyny. So a perfect example is a painting on the left by Botticelli. So his angels of ambiguous sexuality, who, as you can see, they're more interested in each other than in the Madonna. What this is doing, this is expressing Botticelli's own feelings and desires. And on the right, you can see on the top an image of Jacob wrestling the angel, a very popular theme used by hundreds of Western artists to portray a homoerotic scene. So Latin American artists have also created images of angels to portray same-sex desire. On the left, the Colombian, who I just showed you his nude, Dionisio Cortés, he created this homoerotic sculpture of the fallen angel. And in the middle is an angel created, one of the many created by Centeno Vallenilla, once again. And I love the image on the right by the modern-day Mexican artist Nahum Senil. And what he does is he takes the religious alibi of Jacob wrestling the angel and he destroys it in what is clearly a sexual scene. So the Mexican artist, Angel Zárraga, used all these tropes, all these alibis that I've been sharing with you in his 1941 homoerotic murals for the Cathedral of Monterrey in Mexico, in which he depicted a very hunky Jesus on the left, and on the right, androgynous angels and saints, and on the lower right, Saint Sebastian. So now I'm going to talk to you about a crucial saint in art history, Saint Sebastian. But before I do that, I want to tell you the real story about him. So Sebastian was a middle-aged soldier accused of converting Romans to Christianity in the 3rd century. So his coming out of sorts as a Christian caused him to be tied to a tree and shot with arrows, as you can see on the image on the left. But then, 10 centuries later, around the year 1348, when half of the population of Europe had been decimated by the plague, people started to pray to the angel who survived the arrows, Saint Sebastian. And he, then and there, became the most popular saint in Christendom. But then, something extraordinary happened during the Renaissance. During the Renaissance, artists, many of whom, again, were queer, ignored Saint Sebastian's real image as a middle-aged man, and they turned him into a handsome, nearly naked young man with ideal proportions from ancient Greece canons. They started ignoring the arrows, and they started depicting him in scenes that depict more ecstasy than agony. And once the arrows disappeared, Saint Sebastian became the easiest way for artists to express homoerotic desire. And this turned him into a gay icon and into a metaphor for the public martyrdom of the gay community, particularly during the AIDS era. So Latin American artists have also used Saint Sebastian as a homoerotic icon for centuries. The one on the left is from the 1700s and is in a church in Puebla, in Mexico. The one on the right is by the Colombian, once again, Dionisio Cortés Mesa. And the one in the middle is literally one of the stars of today's lecture. It's the Saint Sebastian by the Mexican artist Angel Zárraga. So Angel Zárraga is an artist whose work projects a very modern homoeroticism that includes sexual ambiguity and role reversal. So in his Saint Sebastian, we see the saint fainting away, kind of rejoicing in the ecstatic encounter with the divine. And that gives the artist the alibi to portray him nude and again to show the beauty of the male body. So his Saint Sebastian becomes object of adoration and desire, and with a seductive pose that literally subverts the historical iconography, because we all know about female figures put on display for the male gaze. But this is completely the opposite, so it's really subversive, to the point that when this painting debuted at the Paris Salon in 1911, it caused a commotion. And a critic said something that I find very interesting. They said that the display of both painful and pleasurable feelings in a religious setting takes on an erotic and provocative spin that reveals a sinful taste and a hidden intention in the artist. So I think they got that right. So a common theme throughout history is that many artists created multiple images of Saint Sebastian. These are three of the ones created by the Chilean Claudio Bravo. Saint Sebastian became a key theme in the work of some Latin American artists, such as, again, the Venezuelan Pedro Centeno Vallenilla. Here you see three of his Saint Sebastians, which are purely aimed at glorifying the male body. Here you have three more by him, by the same artist, and I want you to pay attention with the one on the left. I find that particularly suggestive. And if you look at the lower right, you see a young man inviting us, looking at us naked, inviting us to join this highly erotic scene. So this obsession with Saint Sebastian got some artists in trouble. When Mexican artist Roberto Montenegro, whom I showed you already some of his works, included a quasi-nude and androgynous Saint Sebastian, like the one on the left, in his mural, The Tree of Life, he was forced to repaint it because it was not in accordance with Mexico's revolutionary values. And he replaced it with the manly warrior with a shield on the right, but the scandal damaged his career as a pioneer muralist, and he lost his prominence to artists like Diego Rivera, Orozco, and Siqueiros, whose work featured traditionally masculine imagery with stronger dramatic flair and political content. So I want to talk to you now about ex votos. Ex votos are hand-painted objects offered to a saint or a divine, asking for a wish or as a sign of gratitude for a received favor. So I want to show you now three examples of ex votos hand-painted by queer Mexican men thanking Saint Sebastian for granting their wishes. So in this one, from the year 2007, Xavier and Tony thanked Saint Sebastian because a new Mexican law gave them the right to live as a couple without shame. In this one, Juan and Martin thanked Saint Sebastian for those who sin for love. And my favorite, in the one on the right, Oscar thanks Saint Sebastian, but look at it, the one on the upper left, the Saint Sebastian painted by Ángel Zárraga. He thanks that particular Saint Sebastian for his family supporting his homosexuality. So now I'm moving into the next chapter. So artists who use two different concealing tactics to express their same-sex desire. So they created queer imagery, hiding in plain sight, and coded queer imagery. So why did they do that? Simple. They did that because these tactics allowed them to express taboos in a way that was understood for those in the know without alienating the general audience and without being punished. So let's start with the first section. Artists portraying queer imagery hiding in plain sight. And they do that in many different ways. In images of wrestlers and athletes, in patriotic images, and in gender-fluid images. So Western artists have used wrestling images such as this throughout history as an alibi to express same-sex desire. Is this idea of aggression masking tenderness? I love this quote from Barbara Kruger, the artist, who said, "Men construct intricate rituals which allow them to touch the skin of other men." So I want to talk now about Carlos Almaraz. Carlos Almaraz is one of the best-known Chicano artists. He was born in Mexico, but he moved with his family to the US soon after, and then he settled in Los Angeles. So he's mostly known for his depictions of LA scenes, car crashes, his mysterious portraits, and his mythological imagery. But today, I want to draw attention on what I believe is one of his most important images, is this one called The Struggle of Mankind from 1984, which shows a couple of male wrestlers in a scene that suggests sexual entanglement. And Almaraz started exploring his own fluid sexuality in the 1970s, at a time when he was extremely daring. And a possible interpretation for this image is Almaraz's struggle with his own homosexuality. He actually died of AIDS in 1989. So now let's talk about images of athletes. So in ancient Greece, where athletes played sports in the nude, there was a direct connection between nudity, body and spirit strength, and virility. So many queer artists use this alibi to create images of athletes to express their homoeroticism. In fact, for a long time, the term athletic love was a code for love between men. And a perfect example is, once again, these images of athletes by Centeno Vallenilla, who created dozens of homoerotic images like that because it allowed him to express homoeroticism hiding in plain sight. So the image on the left is by a Mexican artist I'm going to be talking about later today, Abraham Angel. In his homoerotic portrait of Hugo Tillman, Angel depicts an athlete playing tennis with the artist himself. The artist is very small there in the background. So in this painting, Angel captures a modern man very concerned with his physical appearance and the canons of beauty that echo idealized classical sculptures, like even Michelangelo's David. And here on the right is one, again, by Claudio Bravo, and this painting is inspired by a painting by the queer Renaissance artist Luca Signorelli. So I've showed you Angel Zárraga's The Three Wise Men, his groundbreaking San Sebastian, and his homoerotic murals in Monterrey. But Angel Zárraga didn't stop there. He created very modern and tantalizing images of athletes charged with sexual ambiguity. On the left, we see his painting about 3 football players. And check them out. So we see 3 men standing very close to each other, their arms wrapped around each other, the one in the middle with his hand very low on the other one's hip, while they are both holding a ball. And meanwhile, the one on the right is looking or gazing very intensely to the one in the middle, while holding on to a very phallic piece of wood. So your interpretation about this painting is as good as mine. And then in the middle, the pose of the 3 female football players, which is reminiscent of the famous 3 Graces. But while not as overt as the male counterparts, the painting shows a woman holding another woman's hand very lovingly, while the third one is looking at us, daring us to question the scene that is going on. And on the right, the image is a portrait of the queer icon, the actor Ramon Novarro, who Zárraga depicts as an athlete to counteract the actor's soft persona. So let's talk now about patriotic and propaganda images. These images from Western countries have always had a tremendous homoerotic feel. Here you see around, like clockwise, you see American ads from World War I and World War II, which appear to us as hugely homoerotic today. But this is not only in the United States, this is all over the world. Check out the images in the lower left from Russia and China. So the Brazilian artist Cândido Portinari grew up in a coffee farm. So Portinari wanted to honor Brazilian spirit with patriotic pictures of indigenous workers showing the harsh reality of their living conditions. So here you see 3 examples of his workers that are heroic, strong, noble, but also undeniably homoerotic. So Latin American artists created patriotic images, taking advantage of the fact that their homoeroticism wasn't questioned, even in public spaces. So the Venezuelan artist Centeno Vallenilla became a master of disguise, creating the mural on the left entitled Venezuela Receiving the Symbols of the National Flag. So picture yourself sitting in one of those chairs at a meeting at the federal legislation place in Caracas, looking at man running naked and embracing each other naked. And Centeno Vallenilla got away with it simply because they portray a patriotic scene. So Centeno Vallenilla is another example of Latin American artists who used the alibi of elevating the perception of the indigenous population to create patriotic, homoerotic images. This is a mural he created for Caracas Military Palace entitled Venezuela. And in this mural, he depicts both worlds, the indigenous and the conquistadors, in what it is an array of muscular, heroic, and yes, homoerotic male figures. So when the military took control of Venezuela in 1948, Centeno Vallenilla was given a big role in creating a patriotic iconography of Venezuela, enhancing the image of the indigenous population. So he grabbed the opportunity to depict this indigenous population in homoerotic images, like all these, but particularly the one on the right, that clearly depict them as objects of desire. And in the image on the left, in sexualized male bodies that resemble classical sculptures that give these indigenous people a heroic stature. And it's interesting because when you go through the work of Centeno Vallenilla, you realize that in a way their homoeroticism in his work alludes to the fact that same-sex desire was considered natural among the indigenous population before the conquistadors came in and brought shame onto their feelings. So then cut 2 decades later in the United States, where in the image in the middle, the Chicano artist Teddy Sandoval took this indigenous, mythological, patriotic alibi for a spin in ceramics such as this one called Macho Mayan, featuring a hunky Mesoamerican warrior wearing underwear and a feathered headdress. And the image on the right is by the Mexican-American artist René Treviño, whose work is about challenging traditional ideas of race, history, sexuality. So let's talk about gender fluidity. Gender fluidity has appeared in Western art throughout history, hiding in plain sight. The image on the right is called a painting, Woman with a Feather in Her Hat. But in fact, it's a portrait of the Chevalier d'Eon, who has an extraordinary life. Somebody should make a movie about him. So the central figure is from Gauguin's famous painting. It's called Where Do We Come From? And it shows what native Tahitians and native Hawaiians call a mahu, or in the middle, or third gender people. And the image on the right from 1929 is the portrait that Gerda Wegner did of her partner, Lily Elby, who was the first transgender woman to undergo gender affirmation surgery. So this image from 1929 is probably one of the very first self-consciously trans images in art history. And you may remember the movie The Danish Girl. The Danish Girl is the story of Gerda and Lily. And the actress Alicia Vikander won the Oscar for playing Gerda. But gender fluidity has also appeared in Latin American art. On Frida Kahlo, on the left, she preferred to dress in men's clothes until she met Diego Rivera, and then she started wearing traditional Tehuana dresses. But she loved to present herself with striking androgynous looks, such as in the self-portrait on the left. But then, when I first saw the portrait in the middle, it literally stopped me on my tracks and made me want to know everything about this artist. So this gender-fluid 1923 self-portrait by the artist Abraham Angel portrays himself with a head tilted, with a sideward gaze and a faint smile. And then the year later, he did the self-portrait, also very androgynous, the portrait next to it on the right. But gender-fluid images appear also in modern-day Chicanx and Latin American art. The image on the left is by Moises Salazar, whose works reflects the discrimination they have experienced living in the US as a non-binary, first-generation Mexican-American. Salazar's work is inspired by fashion and drag culture, and he creates glamorous and defiant images that explore Colombian, Mexican, and Catholic themes alongside queer narratives, usually in the figure of a faceless figure who is a self-portrait of Salazar and who is a stand-in for any queer Latinx youth. In the middle, we see a painting by the Mexican artist Roberto Gil de Montes. It's a portrait called Sylvia. It's a portrait of a transgender woman he knew in the 1970s in his nights out dancing in Los Angeles. So the white band over her chest is perhaps a bandage from gender affirmation surgery, and she's hidden behind a veil, which is a motif that Gil de Montes uses to convey the invisibility, the vulnerability, the fragility of queer and trans existence. And the one on the right is by Marcel Pardo Ariza, a Colombian artist who explores queer representation through photographs and installations that help us envision hopeful queer presents and futures. And this particular image on the right is from an installation called I'm Very Lucky to Be Trans, which features images of 33 trans and queer activists in photos, in poses that combine traditional Catholic imagery with queer nightclub aesthetics. So just like queer artists use codes in their lives, they also use coded imagery in their work in many ways and for different reasons. I want to show you here 4 of the most common ones. Coded gay scenes, coded metaphorical images, to portray a secret love, and during the AIDS epidemic. So Mexican artists showcase Mexico's queer community in coded gay scenes. So Mexico had a group of artists called Los Contemporáneos, which included Abraham Angel and Roberto Montenegro, whom I already talked about, and Manuel Rodríguez Lozano. The artists in this group, they were all queer, and they all flaunted non-normative ideas about sex, friendships, and families, and they became the avant-garde of art and homosexuality in Mexico. On the left, we see the portrait that Manuel Rodríguez Lozano did of Salvador Novo. And if you look at it, it appears just, as a simple modern portrait of somebody in Mexico, but those in the circle understood the coded imagery. So Novo was very attracted to blue-collar taxi drivers. And the image that you see through the window is a street in Mexico City where there were gay bars that were safe for the gay community. And the image in the middle is by Abraham Angel from 1923. It's called The Cadet. And it captures a young man with delicate features, maybe the artist himself, cruising in the night while keeping his identity in shadows. And one of my favorites is the one on the right. Is this iconic portrait by Roberto Montenegro called Portrait of Antiquarian Chucho Reyes and Self-Portraits. And what I love about it is that it was painted over 100 years ago, and it features the same kind of tropes, the same codes that denote for the queer population 100 years later: the limp wrist, the tilted chin, the wry smile. But what is fascinating is that Roberto Montenegro included in the lower right a silver ball. And in this silver ball, he reflected himself. He painted himself in it. And in doing so, he inserted himself in the scene as a proud declaration of homosexual identity. So the color blue was associated with homosexuality because consumption, a very frequent disease, caused a blue tinge in the skin and weakness, which is how homosexuality was considered at the time. So artists such as the Argentinian Alfredo Butero on the left and the Brazilian Cândido Portinari on the right, they used the color blue in these portraits as a code to signify the queerness of the sitters, and also probably the queerness of the painters themselves. So Latin American and Chicanx artists also used coded metaphorical images. On the left, we see a painting by the Chicanx trans woman, Jaylin Gomez, and it features a faceless Latino worker. And by faceless implies invisible, taken for granted. And this worker is wearing Icarus-style wings. We all know how Icarus ended, while he's attempting to fly away from the chains of a lawnmower inside an impeccably groomed landscape. In the middle, we see the work of the Cuban artist Felix González Torres, who is one of the most important conceptual artists in history. And this installation, called America 3 from 1992, features light bulbs which burned out over time, just like his partner did of AIDS. And the bulbs are little by little, they're carefully replaced, reflecting the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And one of his installations just sold in auction for $14 million. And the painting on the right, Benediciones, by the Mexican artist Nahum Senil, shows the artist and his partner on the altar about to be married before the Virgin of Guadalupe. So the artist believes that the Virgin of Guadalupe will protect them from society's criticism and from the Catholic Church. And because of this metaphor, he's able to embrace both homosexuality and Christianity in his life. So this big image, striking image, is by the Chicano artist Rafael Esparza. So the decolonial theory has been a part of Esparza's activism as an artist. And he expresses it in a coded way in this piece. And in the books that you see in the lower right, they are all about decolonial theory. But more important, in the tattoo on the back, which features a scene from an infamous 1598 engraving, which you can see in the lower right, that depicts how the conquistadors annihilated the queer indigenous populations. So artists also use coded imagery to portray a secret love. So after the Mexican Revolution, portraits stopped being something for the elite, and they became popular among the common folk to fashion their identity, and for queer Mexican artists to portray queer desire and figures of ambiguous sexuality during the sweeping social changes that took over Mexico in the 1920s. So the artist on the left is Abraham Angel, the one I've spoken a lot about today, who painted the androgynous self-portrait. So the photo on the left, that's Angel. He was 17 when he started a relationship with fellow artist Manuel Rodriguez Lozano, in the photo next to him, who was 26. And the painting, which is in the middle, is a portrait that Abraham Angel did of his partner at the time, Rodriguez Lozano, in 1922, when Angel was taking care of Lozano, who was ill with pneumonia. But be that as it may, Rodriguez Lozano left Angel for another artist, and Angel died, probably from suicide, when he was only 19. And Lozano, who was very much struck by grief, painted the portrait of Angel on the right after his death, so Angel's youth would be eternally preserved. And it's fascinating how, in spite of dying when he was only 19, with only 24 known works, 4 of which are lost, so basically with 20 works, Angel is considered a pivotal figure in the revolution of 20th century Mexican art, and he has now a major retrospective in Mexico City. So just like their male counterparts, unable to express their same-sex desire openly, many lesbian Western artists use codes to portray their lovers in their art. So on the left, we see a painting by the British artist Ethel Sands. And because she was unable to paint her female lover openly, she instead painted the couch where they spent their time together. And in the middle, we see a painting by the artist Glock. She dated a female florist for 40 years. So because she couldn't paint her openly, what did she do? She painted her lover's favorite flowers, such as the one in the middle. And when the relationship ended, she painted dried flowers, like the one on the right. So let's talk about Frida. Frida Kahlo's bisexuality prompted her to create coded images to portray her female lovers. Frida married fellow artist Diego Rivera, whom we all know, in 1929. They divorced in 1939, and they remarried a year later. So we've all seen the loving photos of the couple, like the one on the left, but the photo on the right of Frida with Chavela Vargas reflects her sexuality more accurately. So Diego Rivera said very openly, "My wife is a lesbian." Frida never hid her bisexuality from Diego. And Diego was jealous of Frida's male lovers, but he encouraged his wife's affairs with other women. Meanwhile, when Frida saw Diego with a beautiful woman, she usually said, "Pass her on to me, I'll take a puff." So the actress Dolores Del Rio is one of the first Mexican movie stars to make it in Hollywood. And she was, as you can see in the upper left, she's counted among Diego Rivera's lovers and maybe also Frida's. So in 1939, the year that Frida divorced Diego, Frida gave Dolores Del Rio one of her most iconic masterpieces, Two Nudes in the Jungle, which, given its subject matter, it immediately fueled speculation about their relationship. So let's look at it. So it shows two naked women, the fairer of the two resembling Dolores Del Rio, resting on the other one's lap. The other one has a foot with a forced perspective between her thighs, and they're both being watched by a monkey, who is a symbol of sexuality and sin. So yes, this could be an interpretation, but part of what makes it a masterpiece is that it has many other possible reads. This could be honoring their friendship, or it could be a metaphor not of same sex, but of self-care. Or also, it could be simply a metaphor of Frida's dual ancestry. She was the daughter of a German father and a Mexican mother. So it could be simply a metaphor about her mestizo and European roots. So Frida Kahlo met the fellow artist Georgia O'Keeffe at the opening of Diego Rivera's big solo show in New York at MoMA in 1931. And Diego bragged that his wife had been flirting with O'Keeffe. But the fact is, these two women had many things in common. They were both fearless, flamboyant, they both dressed in striking ways away from the mainstream feminine vogue, and they both pursued careers as artists while married to older and faithful and powerful artists. So no wonder they were immediately attracted to each other. So in 1933, Georgia O'Keeffe had a nervous breakdown and she was hospitalized. So Kahlo, Frida, wrote her a letter in which she said, "I thought of you a lot and never forgot your wonderful hands and the color of your eyes. I would be so happy if you could write me even 2 words. I like you very much, Georgia." And that same year, Frida sent a letter to a friend in which she said, "O'Keeffe was in the hospital for 3 months. She went to Bermuda for a rest and she didn't make love to me that time. I think on account of her weakness. Too bad." So Frida's painting, Magnolias, on the right, is a coded tribute to O'Keeffe's paintings, such as the one on the left. But this painting by Frida, Magnolias, this coded tribute, if you look at the far right, it includes an open calla lily. The calla lily was Diego Rivera's favorite flower. So in this coded painting, Frida is acknowledging their love triangle. And O'Keeffe and Kahlo stayed friends the rest of their lives. And in fact, Georgia O'Keeffe visited an ailing Frida Kahlo in Mexico in 1951. So the AIDS crisis prompted a variety of artistic directions, from activists like Keith Haring, political like David Wojnarowicz, representational like Hugh Steers, and coded like Felix Gonzalez Torres. So Torres, whose photo is in the right, is a Cuban artist who moved to the US in 1979. Both him and his partner died of AIDS. So his philosophy as an artist was not to be confrontational or angry. He believed that the most successful political moves were the ones that didn't appear to be political at all. And his goal was to infiltrate the museums just like the AIDS virus infiltrated him. So how did he achieve this? So to do that, Gonzalez Torres created coded art with emotional resonance, inviting viewers to participate, calling attention to the spiritual impact of AIDS. And I want to draw to your attention to a really moving example, which is this installation called Untitled Portrait of Ross in LA, created the year his partner died, 1991. So it features a pile of colorful candy in the exact weight of his partner, 175 pounds. So you're at the museum and you are encouraged to eat the candies, like in Catholic communion. So the installation disappears slowly, just like his partner died of AIDS, alluding to society's silent participation in the death of the queer community due to AIDS. But the installation gets constantly replenished, giving his partner eternal life. So when I first encountered this installation and I ate the candy and then I read what it really meant, I literally had to sit down because I was sobbing, because I literally witnessed the transformational power of art. And this is one of the reasons why Gonzalez Torres' work was better received than many of the openly queer artists of his generation, and he became one of the most influential artists of the 1990s. But that's why it's even more shocking that a museum as important as the Chicago Art Institute recently tried to erase the installation's queer message by eliminating a reference to Torres's partner, reframing it in the card explaining the installation as the average male body weight. So the work of Chicano artist Joy Terrell, who is with us today, combines influences from pop art to Mexican retablos and Frida Kahlo's self-revealing works. And Terrell's series of queer still lifes feature American products he grew up with next to Mexican products from his Chicano heritage and HIV medications. So the one on the left is the very first still life in the series called Still Life with Crixivan. And he created that in 1997. So that year was the first time that Terrell's HIV viral load was undetected. And that's when Joy Terrell realized that unlike many of his friends who died of AIDS, maybe he would survive. So then he looked at his breakfast table, that, with the Cheerios, the HIV mess, looking like a striped Mexican blanket, looking like a pop painting. And that's when he got the idea to do a still life series showing his ambivalent feelings about survival in the area of HIV meds and the industry that flourished around it. And the painting has actual HIV pills on it. And Terrell loves to include in some fun, I don't know, what's the word, Easter eggs, like in this case, the phallic cucumber. And the one on the right is an example of the still lives that Joy Terrell did honoring artists who died of AIDS. This one is called Still Life with Triomec and wrapped candies that remind me of the artist Felix Gonzalez Torres. So it has real candy on it, like the ones used by Gonzalez Torres in the installation that I just showed you. And the image of the Michelangelo David is kind of reminding us of the outrageous Florida teacher incident. So the triptych on the left from 1995 is by the Chicano artist Rubén Esparza, and he combines key themes in his work: queer, Latino stories, and AIDS activism. So to memorialize his partner's death from AIDS-related illness, Esparza invited friends to donate blood that he then dripped onto bright latex gloves, creating a mixed media piece that expressed his grief and his anger about the epidemic. And on the right, again, Mexican artist Gil de Montes. And the image is once again covered by a veil. That is the motif he's been using since the 90s. And this veil becomes a ceremonial shroud to register the persistent loss and erasure during the AIDS epidemic. So on the left, we see a work by Jeff Huereque. It's an image of a gold figure with extended arms, surrounded by clouds with celebratory messages, expressing how his spirit remains positive in spite of standing kind of precariously on a column of AIDS medications without which he would drown. The middle image is by the late Chicano artist Gerardo Valenzuela. And it's called The Neglected Martyr from 1990, and it shows an upside-down American flag enclosing a faceless Saint Sebastian. And the red stripes feature skeletons having sex, while the logo made in the USA above the saint connects sex, death, and political neglect during the Reagan era. And the image on the right, entitled Angel Baby, is one of the most famous images by the Chicano artist Teddy Sandoval. He produced it in 1995, the year he died of AIDS. And the image of a muscular angel in boxing gloves combines popular imagery with Catholic and Mesoamerican imagery, such as the snake. And in his biceps, you see he has a flaming sacred heart, symbolizing hope, while the shorts feature the word everlast prominently. So his boxer, with all these elements, becomes a guardian angel who inspires resilience in the face of the AIDS epidemic. So and now in the final section of my lecture, I'm going to talk about how Latin American and Chicanx artists depict their queer communities. So Teddy Sandoval is a central figure in Los Angeles queer and Chicanx artistic circles. So he produced playful artworks that explored the codes of gender and sexuality and the archetypes of masculinity through his signature icon, which was a faceless man, often sporting a mustache, mirroring the gay male clone. So on the upper left, we see one of his most known images, Las Locas, which on the right is himself, the artist. In the middle is his partner, who recently passed away. And on the left, a close friend. So this is a portrait of a queer familia. And the swirling colors around them maybe evoke that they are at a disco. So I love how the painting on the right, entitled Homeboy, in one fell swoop, Sandoval promotes homoerotic desire, he queers the Chicano aesthetic, and he subverts the patriarchal and often homophobic Chicano community. And then in the lower left, we see a photo that Teddy Sandoval took in 1976. And it all started when Joy Terrell created T-shirts flaunting the words malflora, which was slang for lesbian, and maricon for fag. And by wearing them, he reclaimed these slurs as an affirmative queer identity. And this is the photo that Teddy Sandoval took of, of Joy and other friends when they were participants in the Christopher Street West Pride Parade, wearing the T-shirts proudly. So Chicanx artists photographed their queer community at a time when rampant homophobia made it a dangerous political act. The image on the left is by the Chicano photographer Luis Jacinto, who is with us today, and he covered the Sunset Junction Street Fair in 81 and 82 when Latino street gangs were attacking the gay community. So community leaders came up with the idea of organizing this festival where diverse communities could celebrate each other's cultures. The image on the center is by Reynaldo Rivera, a Mexican artist who moved to Los Angeles, and during the 80s and 90s, he took photographs of queer clubs and house parties. And Rivera's work gives visibility to a community of trans women and drag performers who often died young, reminding us, as Rivera says, that LA is a place with a deep history and a short memory. And on the right, we see one of the photographs taken by Laura Aguilar, who created photographs in the 80s and 90s documenting the rich and diverse Latina queer life in Los Angeles, such as this one taken at a lesbian bar. So Aguilar described herself as a brown, fat, and poor queer woman in intimate photographs that challenge society's notions of identity, beauty, and the female body. So let's talk about how some male modern-day Latin American artists depict their communities. So the image on the left, which is an AI image created by Costa Rican photographer Matias Sauter, is part of an ongoing project called Pegamachos. And in this project, he depicts the clandestine concept of pegamachos, which is a local term for trade, heterosexual men who engage in gay sex in the down low in Costa Rica and really all around Latin America, particularly in rural areas. So Matias Sauter uses artificial intelligence to create a series of provocative images, like the one on the left, which create an alternative homoerotic universe, in which this community enjoys their own culture, their own fashion, their own behaviors freely. In the center, we see a painting by the Mexican-American artist Chris Cortez. And in this image called Que Viva los Novios, he recreates his parents' wedding photo. And he depicts himself as both the bride and the groom, adding queer elements, showing his longing for a partner. And on the right, we see the work of Juan Arango Palacios, a child of Colombian immigrants whose work addresses the challenging lives of queer communities marginalized by immigration. So female Latin American and Chicanx artists also depict their queer communities. On the left, we see an image by the Argentinian Leonor Fini, and she uses surrealism to depict a female couple admiring a flower shaped like a female genitalia. And in the middle, we see a painting by Flor Maria Buó entitled Petra and Micaela, which is one of the most revolutionary depictions of lesbian love in the history of Colombian art. So in this painting, we see two women naked, intertwined, the white one biting unapologetically, the black one, who is staring at us, making us complicit in their transgressive scene. So, and then the image on the right, called Absolutely Chicana, from 2009, is by Judy Baca, and it was based on a photograph that was taken of Judy Baca in 1973 during a performance at the first exclusively Chicana show in Los Angeles called Las Venas de la Mujer. And in this show, Baca transformed herself on stage into a pachuca, which was a rebellious Mexican-American woman from the 1950s. So she adopted the tough girl persona, the bad girl, that she and many other women were forced, really, to construct to confront the hostile environment for women and for Chicanas at the time. So Judy Baca is one of the most important muralists to emerge from the California Chicano movement in the 1960s. She was trained in the Mexican muralist tradition. Her most important work is the Great Wall of Los Angeles, which she started in the San Fernando Valley. It's an ongoing project. It's over half a mile long already. And you can actually see her painting as we speak every day at LACMA. And her collaborative work with marginalized communities has created murals that illustrate an alternative history of California, featuring minorities who usually don't appear in textbooks. And in doing so, she achieves extraordinary political and social impact. And the image on the top shows an already existing panel, you can see, about two important groups for the gay rights, the Daughter of Abilities and the Mattachine Society. And on the bottom, you see two sketches of upcoming panels about the ongoing struggle of gay rights. So to end the lecture, these are three of the queer Latin American and Chicanx artists that were included in MOLA's Celebrating Diversity initiative. The one on the left is by the Argentinian couple Chiacchio and Giannone, who create textile pieces such as this one, showing themselves and their dogs, redefining the traditional family portrait. The one in the middle is by the non-binary artist Moises Salazar, and the one on the right is by Joy Terrell, and it depicts one of his famous Halloween parties with two of his friends, Jeff Joreke and Luis, dressed as the two Fridas. So I want to thank MOLA for expanding the visibility of queer artists and for making today's lecture possible. So thank you so much for your attention. If you want to know more about my work, this is my Instagram. And thank you. And if you have any questions, this is the time to do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. One more round of applause for Ignacio. This is incredible.
Thank you.
We do have a couple minutes for Q&A, if that's all right. I'm actually, Jocelyn, do you mind assisting us a little bit? We have one more mic here. I'm going to give you a second to kind of put your thoughts together.
It's a lot to process.
It's a lot to process. It's a lot of artwork, which is wonderful, a chance to see so much of that together. So what I'd like to do is, if you do have a question, we do have a live mic. Jocelyn will be around to pass that. Does anyone have any questions or comments, or even just feedback or opportunity? That's wonderful as well. Anybody over here? Right over here, Jocelyn. Thank you.
I want to say thank you, first of all, for like all your work and just making what gay artists do so, I don't know, it just relates to it justifies what I'm doing, it feels like. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
There's something also that came up, that Felix Gonzalez Torres is someone who I've heard about so many times and have never really been able to connect to. The objects themselves are so abstract, I guess, or so coded that I haven't really been able to get into it. You know, like the go-go boy on the pedestal, I understand. The rest of it, I'm kind of like, So thank you so much for explaining those in a way that connects that and that gets those intimate and private things into there that really help me to understand. I'd love to hear a whole lecture on his work. I think
he deserves a whole lecture. Like I say, he is really extraordinary. And when you get into the nitty-gritty of what he talks about, it's so powerful how he does it in a way that is not political, but just emotional, moving, personal. And that's why he's so important, you know? So, like I said, I still remember when I ate the candy, you know, I read the card, and all of a sudden I literally fell apart because I just realized what he was trying to communicate and how powerful was that. So.
It's hard to see. It's like you need to write the cards for the museums or something.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Any other questions or anything right here? I'll ever pass around.
I don't think I need a mic.
You have a teacher voice?
Yes. I was wondering when the role that the internet and technology has had in disseminating the art, because I imagine, you know, you're looking and seeking and studying this art back in the day before the internet. You had to like travel to see it or acquire the books, but today you can just get it so easily. And I'm wondering, has that had a role in the art movement of sharing and disseminating the art?
For sure it does, and that's actually a very good question because, see, before Instagram, let's say, it was very hard for artists to make themselves visible. But now an artist can even bypass a gallery and just, you know, share his art through Instagram and express his message and write what it means about it, or she, or they. So completely transformed the way artists do and how it's communicated, you know? So, but there's still also censorship with Instagram. There's a lot of censorship. Yes, but it's, you know, but one thing that makes a complete difference is when you see things in person, because it's when you really appreciate the details. And because what I talk about is codes, many times you have to see it in person to really strike you. It's hard to communicate here, but in some cases, it's just spectacular when you are able to face it in person, which is how I recommend it to see them.
Really good question. Thank you. Thank you. Any other ones? One right over there. Thank you.
Hi. Sort of piggybacking on what he asked, but the reverse. Let's say the artist that you showed in the beginning of your lecture.
Yeah.
A lot of those pieces to me were, in my mind, based on mannerism and old, you know, ancient theories. How did that iconography get to these artists?
Yes.
That
So
obviously didn't. Well, I think didn't have that up.
Well, it's interesting because there's not a clear answer to that. Some artists who were maybe wealthy traveled and had the opportunity to be exposed to these homoerotic images in museums around the world. But it's interesting, that's what I said about the Latin American artists. Even though they came from small countries that probably didn't have any exposure overseas, they ended up using the same codes, the same iconography. So Saint Sebastian, for instance, became all over the world. You know what I'm saying? So some icons become so powerful, so strong, that in a way they inhabit the artist everywhere without even having discussed it, you know? So it's a combination of having traveled and been exposed to it and just the nature of being forced to do coded work and finding ways to do it and ending up with the same motifs everywhere.
would that also apply to the palettes of the artists? Because for me, a lot of the work that you showed basically is German art. It's like
Yes,
German expressionists, it's German.
But it's all it all starts with the same code. You know what I'm saying? So it all goes back to the Greek gods. You know what I'm saying? So they accepted same-sex desire. The naked body, male body, was a sign of beauty and beautiful spirit. So that was used as a code from the Renaissance on. So the Renaissance artists used that, and then the German, and then the Latin American, you know what I'm saying? So it became completely prevalent all throughout history, using that alibi. So yes, you're right, but it was used probably starting from the Renaissance all the way until present time, because there are artists who still use these codes.
And could those ideas have been learned by, let's say, the artists? Their education, let's say if they were a classically trained painter, that they would learn about these conventions in art.
Exactly. So sometimes to portray these codes more appropriately, they even had academic training that allowed them to do so, because that it justified everything they did.
And one more question.
Yes.
There's a painting that you showed by Villa Real or something. His name. It's a portrait. It's a painting of a dresser with a person on the left.
Okay.
And there are many objects, many different specific objects on that dresser. Is there a code for that? Is that something? I know that there was a clock and other things like that.
Is that the one of the portrait of the antiquarian? No.
No. It's No, it's
No.
not the Annunciation. It's one in a room, and I think the figure on the left was dressed like kind of in a red, and then it's a dark room with like a dresser, a bureau.
No, I don't. No, I don't think
Okay.
there's anything there. No, but in many cases there is. You know, sometimes when what I love to do is what books and they talk about in type. You know, like little anecdotes. I elevate them into the main story. You know what I'm saying? I take those little details and I make them the big stories. And sometimes, as you say, a little detail in a painting could have such a meaning, like the one in the portrait of the antiquarian with that silver ball with a reflection.
Yeah.
You know, it's such an important part of that painting that needs to be revealed.
Okay, and the single lily, the flower, is a symbol for the Virgin Mary.
Okay.
I love it. Thank you so much. I know we have one more question here over here, and we'll still do two more. All right.
In Latin America, do they have an equivalent of the Comstock law? Do you know the Comstock law
I
in America?
kind of know. Remind me, I know a little bit about it.
So the Comstock law in America was you couldn't put anything in the U.S. mail that was
I know what you're saying. Yes, now I know what you're talking
seen
about.
by the public.
You know what? In all my research, I have never found that as a challenge in Latin America, but maybe it was. But I know in the States for sure, and England for sure.
Because that would explain a lot of like the coding, right? Because you could have naked men who were historic, or you could have naked men who were doing sports.
Yeah.
So you would have cowboys or wrestlers or Roman soldiers fighting nude, and that's why you see like physique pictorial and all of those things that would connect gay people,
Exactly.
Across the country. And some of the images that you showed from Latin America had a very similar
Themes and motifs.
Yep.
But I don't think there was that cross-pollination that you're talking about.
Right.
There wasn't.
Okay.
No, these were individual artists pursuing their own individual desires, as opposed to somebody like Bob Meiser capitalizing on those images in physique pictorial.
But I think a lot of people that they would fetishize that imagery, and it, it's carried on today, whether or not we know where it comes from.
Yeah. Yeah.
One last question, of course. Go for it.
Hi. It's not a question, but I just thought really fascinating presentation. It reminded me one painting of the three wrestler women when they're like kind of touching hands and one of them's looking at the viewer. I'm following this Instagram account that is showing archived footage of pre-Hays Code film.
Okay.
So film that, you know, kind of shows codified like queerness. And it's two women in a waiting room, and one woman walks up, and one of the women at the beginning turns to the other and says, "Watch out for her, she likes to wrestle."
Yes.
Which I thought was really funny. And so seeing that painting today was like the wrestlers, and I was like, oh my God, light bulb moment. But I just think it's incredible like how we kind of create languages that are like quiet and subversive and only for those in the know. And I just think that was great. So thank you for this presentation.
Thank you. And but you talk about movies. That's a whole different presentation. You can do 5 hours on that. You know, in fact, my partner who's here has a blog on classic movies, and he always talks about the coded gay scenes, which in some cases are outrageous. And it's like, how did they get away with this? You know, so yeah.
So part 2 coming to MOLA soon.
Thank you.
I love it. So I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. On behalf of the Museum of Latin American Art, we appreciate your presence. We appreciate your warmth, your generous questions. And we hope to just see you again soon. Again, June 30th, Sunday at 1 p.m., we will have the symposium on empowerment in pride spaces. We do hope you'll come and join us and share in that conversation. Thank you, Ignacio.
Thank you,
Incredible.
Alison.
Please, everyone, drive home safe. There's a lot of cheese, so grab some on the way out. Have a good evening.